Greetings, art enthusiasts, and this is Warren Edwards, and you are here with Create Matter. And we are here at the Art Science Complex with Julie Rauer and Bruce Gemmell. And we're here at the library where we have over 5,000 books, and it's filled with information from all your wildest fantasies. So here we are, and we're going to have a brief and very concise conversation with the co-founders of this complex.
Thank you. Yes, we would like to welcome the viewer inside the realms of our work as if they're on a micro scale, inhabiting Bruce's models, our drawings, and my paintings.
Okay, art enthusiasts, this is Warren Edwards, and this is the continuation of Create Matter. And we have the co-founder of the Art Science Complex, Julie Rauer. And how are you today?
Marvelous. Thank you.
Okay, so I wanted to start off, and I wanted to ask you, what is the mission statement of ACS?
Well, thank you. That's an excellent question. We promote imagination-based thinking and learning. So a prism by which you can accumulate a base of knowledge and manifest that. So we use the metaphor and to basically take one idea that would be totally surprising and unexpected and substitute it for sets or subsets of perhaps known ideas that are cloaked, that are complex information. So we are visualizing interdisciplinary science through metaphor and analogy via painting, drawing, model making, and writing.
Oh, wow.
So all of these, and we do not separate how the brain processes information. We do not compartmentalize thought, meaning we don't put science here, art here, mathematics here, linguistics here. Everything is processed together, and we think that the best way to understand information is to find a relevant, beautiful, compelling metaphor for that information and create your own network, if you will.
That's wonderful. So what is your academic discipline? Tell us.
Oh, you mean my background? Or?
Yes, yes.
Oh, let's see. Well, I'm a graduate of the Cooper Union. I was trained, but not as a painter, interestingly, even though I am a painter. I was trained as a graphic designer.
Okay.
So I do have a degree in that from Cooper. I've always drawn. I'm actually also trained as a calligrapher and a Chinese and Southeast Asian chef.
Okay.
It's true. Yes. So yes, and I have always had a fascination for the biological sciences. So from the second or third grade, I dissected things. I love to see how things work, and I love the transformations of organic entities. I love metamorphoses. I love one thing morphing into another. I mean, if you take something like a fungus, and the four areas of science that particularly hold a fascination for me are plant science, mycology, neuroscience, and materials science.
Okay.
And nothing morphs more than fungi. They morph all the time.
Okay.
And there is a fungus called H. capsulatum that causes a disease, really incredibly nasty, called histoplasmosis. In fact, I did a painting about that using Japanese no theater as the prevailing metaphor, using a shape-shifting character, a fox, called a kitsune, to be the metaphor. And this is how I process information and share it with others. That is the stand-in for what this fungus does when it hits the human body.
So Julie, do you mind taking us through your artwork?
Oh, I would love to. Where would you like me to start?
Well, let's start off here.
Okay, that sounds great.
Yes.
One of the pieces I thought might really be a great place to start is a piece called Wagashi Trap, which think you really have to see. I'm going to hold it up. If you, is that good for everyone? Okay, so this painting I did is called Wagashi Trap Single Cell Atlas for a Fifth Season. And wagashi are traditional Japanese sweets or confections that are always served with the tea ceremony.
Okay.
What is fascinating is they are avatars for the seasons. And Japanese traditional culture is seasonal, intensely so. They're symbols of the fall, foods that are eaten, and there are ceremonies, different architectures, different clothes are worn, different books are read, different songs are sung. But very importantly, these are idealized versions of the four seasons. And I wanted to create a tether to the human world of thwarted expectations.
Okay.
And everyone has had expectations, things that they thought would turn out in one way and was quite something else. I think we've all, this is
I think so, yeah.
Yes, this is a universal thing we have encountered. Now, in here, there is a type of a wagashi for spring. There are thousands of kinds. They are mostly vegetarian, actually, mostly vegan, and they are made of glutinous rice and chestnuts and red bean paste. There is one called a sakura mochi that is actually pickled cherry blossom leaves with sweet red bean paste inside, but I have turned it into a bedraggled creature. I mean, they would never do one with torn leaves, and I turned it into a crustacean. It's part snail, part insect, and it's kind of skulking in the corner. The beautiful crystalline winter. There's a wagashi meant to conjure a pine tree, and its needles are covered with frost and snow.
Oh, okay.
But this is fractured and it's broken. And this is a splash in a summer pond, actually made with a gelatin made of seaweed and koi, actual little sculpted fish. But here, it takes apart. It's corrosive. It's not all enveloping water. It corrodes the wood of the column. And I've set it in a tea room, which is actually at the Met.
Okay.
It's
interesting.
But here, all the walls are gone. I've changed the architecture, meaning the very room that they're meant to support, meant to elevate, is being dismantled.
Okay.
So all of these thwarted expectations are gathered, and a fifth new season is formed, a portal, if you will.
Okay.
Another dimension. And I modeled it inspired by Frank Lloyd Wright's model of the Guggenheim, which was on view at MoMA for quite a while, and sadly is not on view at the time. But what impressed me is Frank Lloyd Wright knew space. And the space that is absent in the coils of the Guggenheim. I feel like I'm in a mollusk. That I love, it doesn't even matter what's up there in the Guggenheim. I love being in those walls, being in those curvatures, feeling that I'm in a conch shell, that I'm in the body of a mollusk, any member of the mollusca family. So this void, this in fact is a peacock feather, a symbol of pride and luxury, and the Greek goddess Hera. And as you see, I have a scanning electron micrograph vision of what the peacock feather looks like. So I paint multiple time frames in each piece and multiple scales. So I scale shift constantly from the micro architecture to the macro architecture. So a fully formed feather rises up here, curves around, and this beautiful iridescent lattice is the microstructure of the feather here. And the Guggenheim opens up to a portal, and the whole room only exists in the shadows thrown by the objects. Even the tatami mat on the floor is gone.
That's gorgeous.
Thank you.
Okay, there was a piece that I did remember. It was called Medusa's Clockwork Remains.
Yes.
Let's go over that, if you will.
Sure, absolutely. I will hand.
Okay, because I wanted to know about this piece. Because when I was growing up, and I always was fascinated by the story of Medusa and Athena. So take us through this piece.
Absolutely. I too share your fascination. In fact, ancient Greek and Roman mythology is a bedrock of a lot of my earlier paintings.
So you say.
And yes, for a very interesting reason, is over the centuries, the original meanings, the original intents have been so watered down, have been so altered, that a lot of the fascination of the beauty and the original meaning is gone. And especially in advertising and mass culture, they've been hijacked. I mean, the idea of the Gorgon with the head of snakes who turns men into stone. I believe if you were to ask the average, guy or gal on the street, they would all say that she's a monster.
Yes.
But she was one of the most beautiful women in ancient Greece. And people would be absolutely floored because the original intent, the actual story isn't known, because, if I may jump off into a segue here, even classes taught in Ivy League schools, no one reads the primary source information. No one actually goes and reads the myth. They will hear a lecture of a teaching assistant who read a book that someone wrote by the professor, and no one has actually read the essays or the literature or the novels that they're talking about. So the actual wall caption, when this piece was in one of my solo exhibitions, was this, if I may, this really does explain it. So, reimagining Greek mythology through the prism of science, which is causality in physics, neuroscience, marine biology, herpetology. I am visualizing the Gorgon Medusa with a compelling narrative as the beautiful woman made monstrous by tragedy, which is the verity of the story, raped by Poseidon in Athena's hallowed temple. Most people are completely unaware that Medusa was a victim of rape. I mean, and this is really, really key. Then further brutalized by the injustice of the grotesque transformation, lurking now in contemporary minds only as past, present, and future monster and a Helion. A tail in mouth villainess deprived of her human origins. Punishment for a victim exacted by, ironically named the goddess of wisdom herself. So analogizing a scenarious corner of neuroscience in the insidious effects of FFI, fatal familial insomnia, which actually is a rare, incurable neurological affliction. And incidentally, the drug companies are never going to come up with a drug because so few people get it. It deprives people of the ability to achieve REM sleep. And without that, they go mad. They become monstrous, and then they die. And exactly like this is a compound portrait of the systematic dismantling of sanity. And this is a portrait of a woman who is or was a Krav Maga instructor with fatal familial insomnia in her family, which is very, very, very rare. Her twin sister was tested and did not have it, meaning she almost certainly does have it. And she will at some point, if she has not, go mad, become monstrous, and just like the myth of Medusa, no one will understand why. They'll blame her, they'll blame the victim, but no one will understand she was made monstrous by some real injustice beyond her control.
So can I ask you something?
Yeah.
Is this like the humbling of the ego?
You could say that's a great way to put it. This is also that. I think, too, it's the ravaging of something innocent, of something wondrous that has been dismantled bit by bit. And if you also notice, and this was never done in any version, I've given her a king cobra's jaw. Now, you always see a woman's face that's just simply made haggard, where it looks old, it looks ugly, but to actually take the physiology of the hinged jaw that opens up to consume like whole pigs and rabbits and antelopes. And I mean, to have this, I think this is far more horrifying, is to see a king cobra's jaw on a woman's face that becomes part of her physiology. But if you actually look into her eyes, they aren't evil or vindictive or malicious. They are frightened, they are terrified, and they're beautiful still.
So take us through what you have been recently working on.
Oh, I would be delighted. This is titled Citadel of Fern Proteins. I have not come up with a subtitle yet, but what this is when I read a fascinating piece of information in the journal Science, I immediately think of how I can put it into a painting or drawing. And when I had read that ferns are the plants that nothing eats. There is not an insect that eats a fern. They're older than the dinosaurs. Nothing harms them. They are the Wonder Woman, the Superman of the plant world. They are incredibly ancient. They are a fortress, and they look so very delicate. And I wanted to show this in terms of actually Bruce, my co-founder, and myself. We are Apis melliflora, or the honeybees that are up at the top. This is the sketch for my painting.
Could you say that term again?
Apis melliflora. I hope I got the Latin right. That should be the Latin for honeybee. They are cradled on each other at the citadel, at the apex, at the ziggurat of this huge tower. It's a very interesting tower because it is inorganic and organic at the same time. I create in all of my work hybrids. They are made up of things that inspire me that I then assemble into, how should I say, new mechanisms for imagination. So there is a musical instrument at the Met called a clavichord. It's a one of a kind. And I took the clavichord, built a tower out of it. There's also a Japanese golden peach incense box that's coming down in a cascade, and the box morphs into the bees. The honeybees morph into the box. So as you get towards the bees, the gold peach incense box loses its cohesion, loses its form, and becomes the physiology of the bees. The bees each wear a crown, but I've made the crowns from a vajra, a protective, talismanic. It's used in Tibetan art, it's in ancient Japanese art, so I made crowns from the vajras, the strings of the clavichord, and then I morph this into a labyrinth, which goes back to the Minotaur and the Maze of Greek mythology.
The
But
Minotaur.
my labyrinth has malachite in the islands, and there's no Minotaur. What is in the labyrinth with the viewer are the fern proteins, and they are milling around, tiny little creatures inside. So the clavichord morphs into this tilted disc, which was inspired by a British Art Nouveau desk set that's in the Met in the British Wing. Like I will see an object and I instantly think about a metaphor or analogy to something I've read in science.
Oh.
And I also love opera and classical music. I love it. And they are in all of my paintings. This is the character of Nabucco from the eponymous opera Nabucco. And he was the vanquisher of his enemies, but he was actually being taken down by his own relatives. It's a very complex opera, and he is literally wearing a cloak of coiled ferns. And the Japanese bridge that he sees but can never cross is literally a wheel, an infernal golden wheel of fern proteins. And up here is the oculus of a honeybee, a giant eye as seen through a scanning electron microscope of a honeybee, and all the hairs are going to have these luminous little grains of pollen.
Okay.
So that's this painting.
That is fascinating.
And these are the palettes that I make. I make my own watercolor cakes. So a lot of people who paint will just squeeze color out of a tube, out of a watercolor tube, out of an oil paint tube, and they will just use color that is made in a factory that someone else has made. I never do that. So I use Yarka, which is a Russian type of watercolor, but they're incredibly bright. They are very unsubtle and not at all the look. I like a jeweled look, a very dark, intense color, not a kind of simple, how should I say, a simple neon or a pastel. So I will mix 10 or 15 or 20 different raw Yarka watercolor pigments into my own watercolor cakes, and then I dehydrate each one of them in Japanese porcelain palettes. And then these are my watercolor cakes that I will then layer to create these thoroughly unique colors that don't exist anywhere else. And I label them with all of the scientific parts of my paintings for exactly what they're for. And so these are all the palettes for this piece.
Okay, so I wanted to ask you a question. Sure. Okay, so let's talk about consciousness.
Sure.
Okay, so how would you explain consciousness?
Well, I do read a lot of Sigmund Freud. I do. I actually love Freud, and even though
how about Carl Jung?
Yeah, I've read Jung, but not as much. I have to admit, I read a lot more Freud. I define consciousness, and that's a tricky question, by how present it is in the unconscious, how present it is in the dream state.
Okay.
And I think the most important...
Very profound.
Thank you. And how should I say, the most important and lucid aspects of your conscious mind, of the mechanisms, of the roiling thoughts that occupy your mind when you are awake, interacting with others, are truly manifested in their full, real form when you are asleep. That's when the brain collects everything, processes everything. So I see a boomerang effect, conscious to unconscious. It's a feedback loop. It actually is something that is an infinite, it is infinity. It is the figure eight. So if you picture the figure eight of infinity, not one end is conscious and one end is the subconscious. It's a continuum. They chase each other, they find each other, they just zip along endlessly, interacting. I think it's a kinetic thing, it's a dynamic thing, and my conscious mind is constantly bringing up things it collects, almost like a scientific journal. So in my conscious mind, I'm always painting, I'm always reading, I'm always drawing, I am always composing a story. And in the back of my conscious thoughts is always playing my favorite classical music. So, Ray Vaughan and Janicek and Ravel and Debussy, Eric Satie, it's the soundtrack to my conscious life.
Okay.
And there actually always is a soundtrack to my conscious life. And then in the background, you'll hear a lot of cicadas because they are so loud. They're almost like the soundtrack to everyone's conscious mind.
Well, definitely. Well, this has been fascinating. I want to thank Bruce and Julie for
welcome.
taking their
We
time
are
and showing us
honored.
through the complex. And this is part 1 of the series. And we're going to come back and we're going to finish this. And I have had such a beautiful time
too.
with you all. And the energy was good. It was palpable. And thank you. This is Create Matter, and this is part 1.